If I asked you to name an emo band, there's a 90% chance that you'd say My Chemical Romance. But what if I told you? You're wrong.
What?
Emo isn't what you think it is. Sure, MCR looked the part. The eyeliner, the black clothes, and the MySpace era melodrama. But musically, they never fit the genre. And the thing is, the band have been rejecting that label since day one. So what is emo then? The term emo was originally short for emotional hardcore. Emotional hardcore was created in the mid-1980s to describe a group of bands that had been growing out of the Washington DC hardcore punk scene. These bands were Rites of Spring, Embrace, and later, Moss Icon. These bands weren't about fashion or image, they were more focused on revolutionising the music in the hardcore scene. They took the aggressive foundation of hardcore punk and injected it with vulnerability, talking openly about their emotional and psychological struggles, and that completely contrasted the political and aggressive lyrical content that was prevalent in the hardcore scene at the time. Rites of Spring, for example, combined their frantic energy with poetic, introspective lyrics. Their 1985 self-titled album is often regarded as the blueprint for what emo would become. Frontman Guy Picciotto sang about heartbreak, alienation and emotional chaos, and the band delivered this through a mix of shouting and melodic phrasing. Meanwhile, Embrace, fronted by Ian MacKaye, yes, the same Ian from Minor Threat and Fugazi, was more restrained musically but equally introspective in theme. These bands laid the groundwork, but it's key to remember that the genre emo wasn't actually a label yet. It was just hardcore music that happened to be emotional. As the 1990s rolled in, the genre of emo started evolving and becoming something of its own. This second wave brought with it more melodic, intricate songwriting. Bands like Sunny Day Real Estate, Jawbreaker, Mineral, and Texas Is the Reason leaned into cleaner guitar tones, complex time signatures, and possessed a more indie rock sensibility to them. The genre was set on a trajectory, moving away from its hardcore punk roots and moving closer to what it is now, the classic emo. The lyrics were still deeply emotional and personal, obviously, but the sound was now softer and the tracks now sparked a sense of melancholy rather than inciting aggression. Sunny Day Real Estate's 1994 album Diary is a prime example and is the most definitive clear point of where emo became its own. It's heartfelt, abstract and dynamic, blending sadness and sincerity in a way that would define the genre for years to come. This phase of emo wasn't mainstream. It thrived in DIY venues, basement shows, and it lived on independent labels. The fans were dedicated, the bands were authentic, and overall, emo still felt like an underground movement. But this movement was growing. But where would it end up? By the early 2000s, emo was ready to burst out of the basement and flood the charts. But something changed in that process. What began as emotional punk turned into something much more commercial. To begin with, bands like Jimmy Eat World, Dashboard Confessional, and Taking Back Sunday were blended emo with pop, post-hardcore, and radio-friendly hooks, with the latter's debut album achieving enough success to spark the genre into the mainstream, and signal to labels that the genre was commercially viable. The thing is, the third wave came with a brand new aesthetic, and this would blur the lines of the genre. The word emo stopped referring to a specific sound and started becoming a culture, or an insult. It was no longer just about personal expression, it was now about how you dressed, what you looked like, how you styled your hair, and even how you posted on MySpace. Yeah, it's where the "it's not a phase, mum" meme was born.
What? It's just a phase.
Suddenly, bands that didn't sound like Jawbreaker, Sunny Day Real Estate, or Mineral were being called emo. Enter My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, and Panic at the Disco, the so-called emo trinity of the 2000s. So look, I'm going to be honest here, My Chemical Romance looked emo, and if we were going to call them emo for that, okay, I understand. Gerard Way's messy black hair, the eyeliner, the dramatic outfits, it was all there. This continued to their music videos too. They were dark, theatrical, full of death, heartbreak and inner torment. You can see why people slapped the emo label on them. Songs like Helena, The Ghost of You and I'm Not Okay captured that emotional turmoil that had always been at the core of emo. But musically, if you listen to Sunny Day Real Estate, Thursday and Taking Back Sunday, there are some key differences between them and MCR. Where emo bands leaned into raw production and personal vulnerability, MCR, After I Brought You My Bullets, built anthems and rock operas that were more akin to the Smashing Pumpkins. Their music was far more polished, theatrical, and narrative driven. Even at their most emotional, their sound was larger than life, more akin to Queen than Jawbreaker. Gerard Way's vocals certainly carried that same emotional weight. That's undeniable. His rasps, his screams, his trembling vibrato, he felt every word he was singing. But the content in the words wasn't a guy bearing his soul or looking inwards. This was arena-ready rock. But the question we're here to answer is there music emo? Let's look under the hood for a second. Is there some emotional lyrical content? Yes. Songs like Cancer and I Don't Love You are heart-wrenching, sincere, and beautifully written. Gerard's vocal style, full of passion, often oscillating between singing and screaming, shares similarities with early emotional hardcore. Then you have the energy in the tracks like Thank You for the Venom, which feels like it's ripped straight from a punk record. But emo music at its core was messy. It was imperfect, raw, and often underproduced. My Chemical Romance, on the other hand, when they broke and moved into dynamic guitar solos and carefully structured songwriting and topics that transcended inner turmoil, they moved past the label. It's not a bad thing to be emo or not, but it just places them in a completely different musical lineage. Then of course, there's their evolution.
They're evolving.
Unlike a lot of emo bands, their sound changed drastically, and this is because of their production. Take Danger Days for example. Danger Days doesn't even resemble an emo record. It's alt-rock at its heaviest, pop-punk when it wants to be, and synth-pop at other moments. And their earliest album, I Brought You My Bullets, has more in common with post-hardcore than it does with emo. It does toe the line closely though. They never stayed long enough within one certain genre to be defined by it. But there's another thing that's more important to consider. Gerard Way rejected the emo label. Here's where it becomes crystal clear. The band themselves never wanted to be called emo. Gerard Way has been very outspoken about this. In interviews, he said plainly, "We were never emo. I think emo is garbage. It's bullshit."
Watch your profanity.
MCR never wanted to be boxed in, and that was the thing. Their ambition was always to reach people through stories, through emotion, yes, but never to be defined by a trend or a subculture. Their rejection of the emo label gave them the freedom to experiment and to become something far more expansive, something different. In truth, My Chemical Romance belongs to the sprawling and ever-evolving world of alternative rock, my favourite. Their music taps into punk, post-hardcore, pop-punk, glam rock, classic rock, indie pop, you could go on forever. It's emotionally rich, yes, but it's also genre fluid. They've tackled big ideas, death, legacy, trauma, survival, the apocalypse, all wrapped into vivid theatrical storytelling. Albums like The Black Parade and Danger Days are full-blown concept records, much more aligned with albums like Melancholy and Infinite Sadness or American Idiot rather than Diary or Nothing Feels Good. Their ability to constantly reshape themselves without losing their emotional, not the genre, core is a hallmark of great alternative rock, not of emo. So are they emo? Here's the truth. My Chemical Romance have emo elements, no one's denying that. But they're not just emo. They're not even primarily emo. They were adopted by the emo scene because of how they looked, how they felt, and how fans resonated with them. But musically, they've always been something more. Their refusal to stay within the boundaries of one genre, their rejection of labels, their continual evolution, they make a stronger case for being one of the most important alternative rock bands of their generation. MCR was adopted by the emo scene, but if we're talking genre and musicality, they've always stood outside of that boundary. Emotional? Yes. Emo? Not quite.